Hey there, listener. I want to thank you for listening to the National Land Realty podcast. Now, please remember to like, share, and review our show. If you can, take a second, hit pause, and give us a quick review. It only takes about a minute to write what you think about the content that you hear on this show. Good or bad, we want to hear it. Thank you in advance. Now on with the show. Welcome to episode number 23 of the National Land Realty podcast, where we discuss all things land. Our goal here is to inform, educate, and entertain those of you who own land or are interested in the buying and selling of land throughout the United States. My name is Mac Christian, and I am the Chief Marketing Officer here at National Land Realty. I'll be your host for this episode. Now, in this episode, we're talking about land improvements for quail hunting with Brandon Fowler, a land professional with National Land Realty from Montgomery, Alabama. Brandon has been guiding quail hunts for the last decade, as well as cultivating quail habitat and consulting those that wish to improve their land for quail hunting. We dive into what to do, what not to do, the tools you need, and the timeline involved in improving land for quail hunting. So, if you love quail, this episode is for you. Okay, I'm sitting here with Brandon Fowler out of Alabama, and Brandon, tell me about your background. How did you become a land agent?
I closed a deal with an agent about 2 months before I joined National Land. I've always had an interest in land, where I wanted to go, and it just National Land felt like the best place for me. That was my best fit, and I've really enjoyed being here.
Excellent, and you have a background in hunt guiding, right?
Correct. I have been guiding quail hunts now for 9 years. Commercially, 9 years. Commercially and private. I did 5 years of commercial hunts at a quail plantation. I've been doing private hunts since that for attorneys, medical professionals, CEOs, stuff like that.
Tell me a little bit about the plantation setup that you were guiding on. Not nothing to violate any kind of NDA or anything like that. But I was just curious, like what's sort of the setup with those things? Because those private hunts are not something that your everyday person gets to participate in. So what is that like for somebody walking on to like a private land hunt like that with a guide?
So we'll start with the plantation type commercial hunt. The plantation style commercial hunt, they have the one I hunted on was like 900 acres. They had 5 separate fields that they hunted twice a day. It was a put and shoot type hunt. They would go out, put 30, 40 quail out before the hunt. Then you'd show up in the field, take usually 2 hunters, sometimes 3, and you would hunt the field in 2 halves, basically, because they wanted you to hunt like half the field and then shoot what quail or recover what quail, point and shoot if we can, as many as we can off that half. And then a bird guy comes out on a bird buggy, picks a quail up, and he'll meet you in the field. If you're not back, you have a little break at the truck, you shoot the crowd, drink some water, talk about dogs, let them talk about business, and then you finish on the other half. And if you've got a little bit of time left, because I'd hit the whole field over. So we hunt the 2 halves, and then I would take the dogs. And of course, birds have been moved through, and might as well just take the dogs and hit it again. You don't find other birds, even birds displaced off of other fields that other hunters are hunting. And but it got to be that was the same thing every day. The same thing every day.
I was going to say, like, if you're hunting the same field, are the planter birds? I've run into planter pheasants quite a bit. Do they maintain their cover until the last second? So they're fairly close when they go.
Right, the very, very last second.
Okay.
My birds were pointing some birds at less than 2 feet. I mean, they were on top of these birds, and that's not good for young dogs. It's not good for me as a wild bird hunter, because then when we get in the field and hunt wild birds, the dogs are like, well, crap, I'll point that thing at 2 feet. You know, they want to get just as close to them as they can get. And by the time they keep creeping in there, the bird's gone, of course, you know. And then I have an attorney friend here in town. He called me up one morning. He said, let's go hunting next weekend on my place. And I'm like, okay, we can do that. And so I put together a hunt, and I went and bought some birds that were flight condition birds just to make sure that we'd have some to shoot, because I didn't know anything about this place. But I would do it a little bit different. Instead of putting the birds down by spinning them in a sack and drop them in a place, I'd drive out to the field and open a pen up and like, see you. And if we find you, we find you. If we don't find you, then have a nice life, And it got to where I was doing those kind of hunts, and we would hunt 2 hunts, but it would be a morning hunt and an afternoon hunt. And we would hunt, probably would cover 150, 200 acres in a morning, hunt on buggies. Yeah, we'd drive buggies, let the dogs run. Dogs would point. We'd get off, and my dogs are pretty well broke, and they know that. And once you go on point, we're not flushing a bird. We're going to point and do what we have to let my handler or whoever shoot these birds. And so we started doing that, and it just became, that was more fun. It was just more fun than doing the commercial hunts. And I could go to these people's property and hunt their properties, help them clean the birds, get everything done, get paid, load the dogs up, and go home, and not worry about the whole upkeep of the commercial hunt. And I can do it my way in my own style. And
right.
So that's what I started.
It's less. It sounds like less catering, because when you're talking about the private hunts like that, you're talking about like, it's not just lunch, right? Like this is like a catering.
Right.
It's like, it's not just hanging out. Like this is a whole atmosphere. It's almost like a day at the golf course, right?
Correct. Or instead of playing golf, though, you're shooting at birds. And, and then it got to where I was doing these hunts, and I'd buy a pheasant or two, and I'd throw a pheasant in this group of birds, especially if I knew that I'd been hunting with these guys for a while, and let's shake it up. If I've done 2 or 3 hunts with these guys, let's shake it up. Let's throw something in here they've never seen or they won't see in South Alabama. And I'd throw a pheasant in there, and we'd get out in the field, and I'd mark a quail. I'd take a quail that out of a box of these 200 quail that I'm going to turn loose on this property that we may never see again, but I tie like a flagging to it, a piece of, just surveyor flagging to its foot. And I throw it out in the field, and I would tell them that the person that shoots this, there's a bird out there that you'll know when it gets up if we ever see it. And I tie it loose so that eventually it'd fall off.
Yeah.
But I was like, if a bird gets up and you shoot it, whoever kills that bird gets $100. And then they'd start taking bets on who shoots this bird. And it became, and it still is. I still do it now. It's a fun day. These guys get out there. They can be free as they want to. We can ride around on machines. We can watch dogs work. We can not shoot a bird. One day it rained on us, and we just sat around the camp house and played poker all day. And just, it's just one of those things. And you're not constrained to that, that commercial thing, because when you go on this commercial hunt, they guarantee birds. You're guaranteed to get it. I don't guarantee anything. I guarantee a good time. I guarantee a long walk, and we hunt, and we get in a lot of wild birds. And that's what kind of one of the things we started seeing was on these places where we have been doing these hunts, we started seeing wild birds, and we started seeing 3rd generation birds or 2nd generation birds from last year that were left over, that were thrown out here, or the year before, or 2 years ago. And by the 2nd generation, those birds are wild. I can promise you those birds are wild. There's no tameness left in those birds, but you can't get close. They're gone. They know. And they've been living, a couple of years out in these savanna grasses, and they've got to get away from hawks. They got to get away from predators. They understand how to survive. And man, it's changed the quail hunting in my area, at least.
That's fantastic. So yeah, let's get into that. So you've been working with land to cultivate land specifically for, and you're talking about quail, but as you mentioned, that the land that you can cultivate for quail are also big draws for deer habitat and, other game species. But, with your love being in quail, let's talk about how that comes about. Like, when did you first start working with land to sort of like change it to be a better habitat for quail?
I kind of toyed with the idea when I was, I guess, 15 years ago, but about 10 years ago, I really got into it. I really started trying to change the habitat. Let's not change it. Let's improve it. I don't like to use change because a lot of times change throws in a bunch of invasive. Let's improve it. Let's put natives back. And then doing some forest thinning and native grass plantings and stuff like that. And we did plant some invasives or introduced species. We'll say introduced. You plant some plum trees and plant some shrubs and stuff for cover. You need that cover for those birds until you get some grass, get some cover up, some native cover up, and then just nuke that stuff, get rid of that crap that was introduced because it's not good for the habitat anyway. But I've been doing it for about 10 years and we've really seen a change in how it works. Cutting timber, burning is a big thing. I know in your neck of the woods, fire's not good up there, but in the deep South down here, fire is it. You can run a fire through something and open up that native seed bank. It'll change the habitat back to native habitat and make it look phenomenal.
I was talking, I brought this guy up a few times now. It's almost like he knows what he's talking about. I've been talking to Dr. Grant Woods, who specializes in whitetail properties. And that dude is a certifiable genius when it comes to deer. But conversation that we were having about quail, and I had never thought about it. And just the way he said it was like, why did I never think of that? He was talking about quail habitat, and he's like, you can't have all this brushy stuff and you can't have all this thick stuff. He's like, you got to remember, quail have little legs. And I was like, wow.
That's right.
It changed my perception of quail habitat. It was like, how did I never? Okay. Yeah. That's pretty obvious now.
Right. They got short legs and they've got to have understory to walk under. They've got to have that stuff that they can walk through, walk under, and not get tripped up on and get caught up on. And they've got to have escape routes. Without the escape routes, this quail's not going to survive. So, and fire is the key. And the property that I'm fortunate enough to hunt and be a part of is 1,000 acres in Macon County. It's on a rotational burn, and they don't burn the entire property at a time. It burned about half of it, and that allows the wildlife to move from the burned section into the unburned stuff while it's burning. And then as it's growing back, they come back there and they eat the forbs, they eat the bugs that are there. They love that ash. They get into that ash, and I don't know what it does for them, but they get in that stuff, dust in it, and just eat that stuff up, and then start greening up, and then they're in there eating bugs and forbs and stuff like that. So,
yeah, we always called it stormtrooping. Whenever you see the quails like charging through the grass, quails, right? I'm using the plural. Whenever you see quail charging through grass, you can kind of see the heads bopping through there. It's like, we just called it stormtrooping. But they do. They find that understory and kind of just tunnel their way through to get away from things because they're not as visible, but they're also not hindered in that kind of environment. So when you're looking at building something up, tell me about sort of what sort of your approach is. Like you look at raw land, and what do you want to do to make it optimal for quail?
So we'll take my property.
I think you just touched on it, but I want to look at it like a process. Like, okay, let's take this piece of land that is not good and make it good.
We'll take my property in Mississippi, my family property. It has not been managed for 20 plus years. Now that I own the property, I get fussed at, I get yelled at, I get told I'm stupid, I get, all this fun stuff by family members because I come in there and I cut 40 acres. Immediately cut 40 acres. Cut every tree on 40 acres. And they were like, what are you doing? But my plan is, and it's a long plan. It's not a short, it's not one of these things going to happen overnight, and you've got to see the vision to do it. But what I would do on a property like that, so I cut the 40 acres. That's going to be I'm going to make it a savanna area. with some native grasses. I'm going to plant some longleaf pines. I'm going to plant some mast crops in there, plant partially planted oak trees. It'll never make any cash money for that 40 acres, but the rest of the property will. And then I'm going to take the rest of the property and I'm going to cut it to 70 to 100 trees today. Everything else is gone. And in that understory, I'm going to plant grasses, warm season grasses, late season grasses, fall grasses, anything that I can make that improve that soil condition, because that soil's been standing under these trees, getting no sunlight to the ground for 20 years. I mean, it's just dead. You can say it's sterile. And then once we get a stand of longleaf planted, we'll start burning that. We'll start burning under those oak trees once they get up big enough they can handle the fire, and then get rid of the stumps and start planting for birds specifically, which also helps the deer and helps the turkeys and helps your other wildlife. But start planting small seed crops or small seed plants. And my goal is to do it all native. A lot of places plant like grain sorghum and stuff like that for them, but I want to plant all 100% native grasses. I want to take this property and go native all the way. Let's just stay away from anything that's not non-native species and see if I can get the quail to come back to that property. There's quail on some properties adjacent to it, and there's some quail on the property in areas where it's open, where there's already pine plantations. But we're going to start burning, and we're going to start fertilizing and start planting stuff that need to be planted, and get rid of the invasives. There's a ton of invasives, a ton of privet, a ton of kudzu. Get rid of holly bushes. I despise a holly. I think it should just go away. There's no reason for it. There's no use for it. It just disappear. I know some songbirds eat the holly berries, but it does no good for me. I hate hollies. They just need to go away.
Well, and when you're talking about thinning the trees, that's kind of an important topic too when you're looking at rejuvenating the ground underneath the trees. Like, you're talking about relieving crown space to allow sunlight through. So when the trees that you harvest out, are you looking at timber yield on that, or is that just take it down?
That's timber yield. It'll be sold for timber yield. And that's a good way to put some money into the property. You can take that timber that you cut and put that into your plantings, or put that into reforestation in some areas that need some reforestation stuff done, or fertilize, or road building, or building ponds, or building, wetland mitigations and stuff like that. You can use that money from that timber to offset some of those costs in doing that.
Right. Depending on how much you have too, and what what the timber market is. Yeah, it depends on what the timber market is too. Last few years, it's like solid gold, when you're going through it. But so the first thing you're looking at is identify areas that you want to open up for animals. And in one area that you mentioned in particular, 40 acres, you're leveling that. Like, that's completely open field, open area to where, anything that wants to get out there in the open can. And then you're opening up the rest of the property to allow more sunlight, more growth, and then using native plants, seed-bearing plants in particular. And you mentioned some forbs in there. So you're really just moving through, developing the understory. And then, do you burn first before you going through with the plants, or is that because I know that there's going to be some trash on the ground, right? Like, it's like the dead leaves.
Right. There's going to be a ton of trash. There's a ton of trash on the ground now. But what we'll do is put some fire lanes in, come in and spray it. It'll spray it really hard under that understory to kill anything that sprouted back up since the cut, and then burn it, and try to run a slow fire through it so that it's hot and it'll burn everything up and it's gone. And then I'll probably root rake it, or take a dozer or skid steer or something through it to move that stuff that didn't burn up, and windrow it and then burn it again, or pile it and burn it again, and then come in there and start planting it. And I'll plant sections of mixed seed grasses, native grasses and a lot of that, there's some grass there. There's grass seeds in that soil that have been laying in that soil that are dormant that will come back. They will they will come back once you start opening that understory and get some sunlight on them and get a little moisture to them, and they'll start sprouting. They grow it. So.
Gotcha. So landowners that go into it should look for opportunities to thin, opportunities to open the land up, rather than, because there can be a misconception that like the more trees, the more cover, the more animals. It's like, no, when you get more trees, you cut off that sunlight and everything is like gone underneath.
Correct.
Okay. So what else? Like, what are sort of the next steps that you're looking at? I mean, are you looking at water sources? Are you looking at, more foods?
You need more food. One of the things that I look at, and then especially my place in Mississippi that we're talking about now, it borders a river. I've got 1 mile of river frontage, and so I don't really worry about water. It's there. If the river goes dry, then we're all in trouble anyway. So, but they've got water. But we saw a drought down here this year. I'm sure you saw a drought up there, and the lake on the property here in Alabama that I hunt, that lake dropped 3 feet this year. So that was the only water source primarily on the property when we hit that drought, which was good for timber companies. Now, the timber companies love it when it's dry because they can get in there and they cut timber. But I don't like it when it's that dry because it forces all the wildlife down to that one small central located area around that one water source. So water sources aren't that big, but you need cover. I like to leave some bedding areas. I know that's a little different, but I've watched deer bedding grass right in the middle of one of those savannas under plantation cut pine trees, and my dogs walk right past them and the deer never move an inch. And it's because they know they can hide in that stuff. But if I can give deer travel corridors through some of that savanna in a bedding area, so you've got a wetlands area that's wet and you can't really get in there and work it, turn it into a bedding area. Let the deer take it over, let them have it, and they can live in that. They can travel through it. Then they just come out into those savannas and feed and eat and stuff like that. So it works out for both worlds.
So how long of a process do you usually look at if you're taking something from scratch, right? Because it takes time to get this stuff done. So if you're taking something that looks pretty rowdy, right, and you're trying to build it up and build a quail habitat on acreage, what sort of timeline are you looking at in general? Because it really, it depends on how steep it is. It depends on, how much water there is, all kinds of variables. But, in general, if you're working it, what are you usually looking at?
If you're looking at raw ground and you need to come in and plant some trees and you need to do some other plantings and some burning, you can start with a briar patch on raw dirt and turn it into a quail habitat in about 3 years.
3 years. Okay. And what are like the there's a million tools you could use for that, obviously. Like, I mean, everything from just the tools you need for a burn, right? Like you gotta have drip torches and you gotta have sprayers and you gotta have, but
right.
To be able to go in there and be like, okay, I can take my lands now and build it up. What's sort of your primary things that you use?
A tractor. A big thing is a tractor, a bush hog, a harrow behind that tractor to break that ground some if you need to. I really don't like to break the ground. I've listened to Dr. Grant Woods, and he doesn't like to break the ground. He likes to use a seed drill, to crimp the grass and stuff like that. But he doesn't like to break the ground too much. And I kind of agree with him. It's not beneficial to the soil to break it because your native plants can have 6 foot of root base in that. And if you break that, cut that grass off, then you're shortening your root base down to 2 or 3 inches. And that's not really good for your habitat. But a tractor, a harrow, in some places where you just absolutely have to break the ground, a good bush hog, front end loader on the tractor is a must. Forks on that tractor to move seed and move stuff around with. Time, just be patient with it. You can't rush it. Kind of have a plan when you go into it, knowing that you can turn this into habitat in 3 years. But your trees that you're planting, pine trees and oak trees, you're talking 20 plus for them to get up there and get some canopy on them. So be mindful of that. Dude, that's not going to happen overnight. Now, you can take something that's got a few pines or a few oaks on it and thin them out and do some work around them. But if we're talking raw dirt, just nothing there, it takes time, but you need a tractor and you need a good bush hog. Lay your fire lanes off. That's where you're really going to use your hair up, is to plow your fire lanes, get that dirt broke up, and then burn the crap out of that stuff. Just light it up and let it burn. It's amazing. I'm a huge fan of fire, as I said before. Just burn it. Let it burn everything that can burn. And then go back in there and see why it didn't burn. And then take your tractor with a bush hog, if it's small enough, bush hog it down and then burn it too, because it's going to be beneficial in the end. You're putting so much back into that soil. It's so beneficial for the burn. And then get on a regular burn schedule and say you burn everything this year. Next year, only burn a quarter of the property. Leave that other stuff to let it grow. And then 2 years from now, burn half the property, but don't burn the same quarter in that, when you burn half that you burn this year, burn it another half of the property, and then just start rotating the property. Then cut it up in chunks and leave spaces that are not burned for 2 or 3 years. And you'll start seeing more wildlife. You'll start seeing more wildflowers.
And that's what's fascinating about the burn schedules, right? Is like fire will actually activate seeds that are not otherwise activated when that happens. And I never even thought about that. And it's amazing what it does, and it like cultivates the soil. And I've been blown away because, like you said, I come from an area that where you put all the fires out because just too many fires. Northwest is like a fire haven, and
right.
And I've talked to an agent of ours, Mark Lewis, sorry, not Mark Lewis, Mark Anderson. I'm gonna have to cut
Mark Anderson.
Mark Anderson. Jeez. Anyways, certified, fire guy that was telling me all the ins and outs of it. Like, where you have to time with the wind, you have to know the wind schedule. They know the humidity schedule. They will test it out. Like, it's a science. It is it's
amazing.
It really is.
My wife's cousin is a smoke eater. He fights forest fire, and he burns for the Forest Service, U.S. Forest Service here in Mississippi. And he is brilliant. I mean, down to what hour, what minute, what's the humidity going to do, where we're changing from, which direction we need to burn from, because that's what he does. His whole life revolves around fire. And it works. Fire works really well here. I was listening to a podcast today while I was driving on wolf hunting in Idaho. And the guy on it was Cutting the Distance podcast, their new episode that came out either this morning or yesterday. And they were talking about wolf hunting in Idaho, where a fire went through, and how much it improved the habitat even there where the fire went through in Idaho, because it cleaned the understory up.
Yeah, it does. It really does improve the ground. I think the thing everybody's running into now is the level of brush accumulation and fuel accumulation that is lower on that ground. It's one of those things like, yeah, it's a great in theory, but there's so much unmanned, ground out there. There's so much land. 70% of Idaho is open land that
right.
You light a match and let it go. And it's like, sure, yeah, it will burn everything, but it will burn everything. And
yes,
it's like catastrophic at this point, and it goes up like a blowtorch. And it's one of those things, like, I'm so interested about stuff in your area. Just one, the topography is more friendly to it, right? Like, you can light something on fire there and it's not as extreme. So the acceleration of the path of the fire is not going to be as extreme. But you get into some of the canyons, west of the Rockies, and tiny little fire, and it's basically burning straight uphill. And so
right,
got this wall of just apocalypse running up a hillside. So it's interesting. So for you, when you're managing a habitat, fire is a big part of it. Like, it's almost like a tool that you use, right?
Yes, it is a very, very important tool. One of our most important tools is fire.
And then when you're talking
another thing.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead. We'll get into that later. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you about the food. You were mentioning native grasses, native seeds. Are you looking at seeds for quail that have a specific mineral quality or nutritional quality, or is it just whatever they're going to eat?
It's basically what they're going to eat. But okay. What I have found, and I've killed a lot of quail in green grass, early season birds or late birds into early spring. And what I found is these birds are eating like clovers but if you've got grasshoppers, if you got something that a grasshopper wants to eat, those birds love grasshoppers. They get in there and just go to town on a bunch of grasshoppers. And you find that in those grasses but you need that seed, to regenerate your seed bank, keep it coming. But, I'll clean a quail, and even when I'm hunting wild birds out west, like I did in Nebraska and South Dakota this trip, I open them up. I'll look to see what were you eating, what was in here, what like.
Do you really?
I do. I open their craw. I want to see what's in the craw. What have you eaten? Because that tells me a lot about what the bird's doing, and it also helps me pinpoint where I need to hunt when I'm out there. If I find these grasses or I find these berries that they're feeding on, if they're feeding on wild blueberries or they're feeding on rose hips or they're feeding on something like, okay, then we're going to hunt this area. This is what we're looking for. And I'll even do it with my quail. Even been hunting here in some of this property I've hunted 4 or 5 years, and I still know what they're going to be doing. I open a quail up and I see what's in the crop. I want to know what you ate. What were you feeding on today?
That's such a good idea, but I've never thought of it. I've done it. You do with fish, right? Like you'll check out fish to see what they're feeding on and know what to throw. But I've never thought about it with birds. It totally makes sense, though.
Yeah, just open them up, see what's in the crop, see what they're eating. And a lot of times you'll find that they're eating grasshoppers, or they're eating a specific type clover, or they're eating berries. There's some kind of little. It's not a rose hip. There's some kind of little red berry that I found out west. That these birds, when I was shooting rough grouse in Wyoming, they were feeding on some kind of little red berry. I don't know what it was, but
maybe
I learned a currant or something like that. And I was like, okay, if we find those, we're going to start finding some grouse because that's what they're feeding on. And inevitably, we would find grouse. They would be feeding on that stuff.
That's such a good piece of advice. That's a good little nugget right there. Side note, have you ever had... I read about rose hip tea during the winter and, like harvesting rose hips, and I decided I was going to try it. And the thing I didn't know about it is like, you really have to filter it. I was used to like, you could throw the plants in there, boil it, and you got tea. And I did it, and I didn't know about all the spines in
the rose hip.
And I took a drink of that, and it was one of the worst experiences of my, like, I had an itchy throat for like the next week of my life. It was so terrible. So that's just a side note on rose hips. It just, fun stories.
So I was
like drinking a porcupine, man. It was terrible.
Exactly. That's not going to do it. I was in Wyoming 2 years ago, and the rose hips were full then, there were rose hips everywhere. And I saw people picking rose hips up and down the road. I'm like, why are you picking those things? Because I would fool with them. So I stopped and I cut one open and I tasted it. I was like, that is the most horrible thing I've ever tasted in my life. And I was like, no, I'm not eating that. And then I asked the lady what she was doing, and they were drying it, making tea out of it.
Yeah, you can make tea out of it. It's pretty good. And it's what is it? The vitamin C in rose hips is something like 4 times anything else you can get a hold of. It's something ridiculous that like it has more vitamin C than anything.
Really?
Yeah, it's a big thing for like the health and stuff like that. So it's up there with like elderberry and stuff for health purposes. Anyways, I know we're talking about land, but it's a fun sidetrack, right?
Right. It'll all tie in. But yeah, so with bush hogging, and I've learned this the last few years, we bush hog a lot. We've got a batwing bush hogger. We bush hog a good bit on our roads, keep our roads up. But this year in particular, I saw young quail in September. These birds were like teacup-sized quail and a covey of quail in September. And that got me to thinking about us bush hogging, what are we doing? What kind of detriment are we having to the quail population on these late hatched birds? They're seeing birds, in September, those birds should be big enough to fly. And they could fly, but they were teacup size, So why keep off your property, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Keep out of your ditches, if you have to keep a road up, it's best to take that road and spray it with a Roundup at a week rate to keep the grass from growing, just slow the growth a little bit than it is. And especially if you want to do this in June, July, August in our area, spray it with a week rate of Roundup to keep it from coming up. And instead of putting a tractor and a bush hog on it, because if you're trying to grow quail, those quail are going to be little, they're going to be tiny, and you're going to cut them up with a bush hog. Yeah. They can't get out of the way. And or even if they get out of the way,
hit the eggs or something like that, you could kick up nests as you're going through. If it's that time of season, because you can't time out that first brood. You could probably go like, okay, it's always a certain type of year, but then you can see like second and third broods, like pop up right during the year, and then you're right, you can take down the population that way.
Yep, and you can be very detrimental to your population of birds. So I would say bush hog late September, October, if you're going to bush hog. And I know people are, because they're getting ready for bow season. They want to put food plots in, they want to hunt deer. Deer's king down here just about, everybody wants to shoot a whitetail, but it doesn't hurt. We have long growing seasons. Plant your stuff late in the season. Plant it in October. Don't plant it in September. And if you've got to get in there, as I say, spray it with something. Spray it to keep your grass from growing, but don't bush hog it. Then come in there and clean everything up late in the year when people are going to be using the farm or going in and out. Most deer hunters are going to bow hunt a few times early in the season, and then they're going to lay off, and they're going to be after November here before they go back in the woods, really, or mid-November or later. So then while you're down there bow hunting or whatever on your property, then do your work when you get done bow hunting, and you'll be okay. And you're not going to kill your quail.
Right. So how many acres do you want to have to hold, like, say a few coveys? What sort of optimal? And I realize, the best answer is, get yourself 4,000 acres. You'll definitely hold some quail, but it's not always everybody's possibility. So like, what do you want as far as acreage? And I realize you also have to account for lead flight as well, and neighbors and all that kind of thing. But
right. And I've heard this a lot in a lot of different ways. And I've talked to people about what a quail will do. I know that a quail, for one quail, will cover 40 acres in a day. They will walk on that 40 acres in a day to feed. Now, he may travel 2 miles from here during the spring looking for a mate, but on a typical day, they're covering 40 acres. And a lot of people will say, well, I've always seen quail at this spot. So there's a tree that they always, where there are always quail. There may always be quail there, but that's not the same covey of quail that's always there. Okay. So people think they're in their mind that's that same covey that they're always seeing. It's not. It's going to be another covey, or there may be 2 coveys working in the area, or 3 coveys working in that area, and they're just kind of interspaced together, and working together. And when we're talking coveys, I used to think of a covey as a group, as a family group. We're coveying up as a family. What that normally is, it's the male bird and the hen and their offspring for that year. That's their covey. And then when those birds split up, late fall, late winter, those birds are going to split. Then you're going to have a set of, a pair of birds, a male and a female, and a hen. And they're, that's going to be a covey. Now, those coveys can join and be big coveys. You can get 2 or 3 coveys together, but you're going to see most of the time it's 2 adult birds and some sub-adults as your covey.
So that's interesting. So as the season goes on, you will have new coveys emerging just by nature of the quail leaving their family and starting new coveys.
Correct.
That is, I love learning new things. I'm not, and I hunt quail myself, but I haven't ever like dove into it. It's one of those like I have my Brittany Spaniel and she finds birds for me, but that's about all I jump into. So when you are like building up your property for coveys, are there certain environments that you want to have sort of like for roosting, for relaxed, that kind of thing for quail? Like you mentioned having a tree that they're always in, or a bush. And I think a lot of people see that, like you get to those thick bushes and they kind of chill out up in the branches, but that's not like their home range. Like that's not where they relax there for a little bit, but they're bouncing to other places. What's sort of an optimal sort of setup that you want to do?
So what we have found on the property that I hunt and other properties that I've hunted, if you've got plums, and I find this in the wild birds too out west, if you have plum bushes, wild plums, you've got quail. They love those dried up wild plums. When late winter, they fall off and hit the ground. That's what they're going to eat. Because, quail are ground nesting birds. Although I have seen a few quail in trees, they're on the ground. They're ground nesting. So, you want some kind of overhead cover like that for them to get up under and roost under at night. And, sorry, my dog caught my eye out there. Anyway, but you want those birds. Those birds love to feed under those plum bushes, especially late winter. And then most of the places I found them roosting for the night have been in like bicolor hardwood areas, or some kind of hard mass, something like that, something they can see, so they can see overhead predators at night. And also if it's windy, they're going to be in a more grassy area. If it's, they're going, so you've got to have a multitude of different cover for those birds to get into. So there's no one answer, one thing that you really want. It's a mix. You need that happy medium mix.
Gotcha. So what's the best piece of advice? What do you absolutely, you mentioned, use tractors, burn, make sure you have food, make sure there's like a water source. Anything else that you would add for a landowner to sort of cultivate their land to bring in quail and by proxy other animals?
Time is time. You give it time. You're not going to see this happen overnight. A lot of things that I see is detrimental to the birds and not so much to whitetails, but to wildlife in general is row cropping. People come in and row crop and they row crop ditch to ditch. Well, you're not leaving any cover. Leave a little bit of cover. Ask if you're leasing ground or your ground butts up to a farmer or something like that. Ask the farmer, hey, can you leave me just a little buffer there for a little bit or something? Or ask the farmer, let's not plant it all the way to the ditch on this side. Let's leave that a little bit open and let those birds work that over. Cutovers are a big thing that quail like to get into. 4-year-old cutovers, it seems to be really good for quail because it's got just enough overstory for the birds to get underneath, and can live underneath that, and they're safe from predators. So time is beneficial. Give it time. Do the work that you have to do. Do the plantings. Do the cleaning. Get your grasses going. Even supplement your birds if you want to. Go buy 500 birds. Go buy 1,000 birds and turn them loose. Don't turn them loose and then take your dogs and throw your dogs on them.
Let them get wild. Yeah.
Turn them loose. You're going to lose about 80% of those birds anyway to predators. But, if you buy 1,000 birds and you lose 80%, you still got a good number of birds that can survive and raise birds. And then you're looking at second, third generation birds, and those birds will be wild. They will be wild in second, third generation.
So on that note, and you probably already have touched on it, I think I've caught a couple things, but what would be the worst thing you could do? What is a do not do if you want quail on your land?
Do not do if you want quail is do not, if you find quail, don't shoot them. Don't shoot them down to detrimental numbers. Lay off your wild coveys. Don't let your property grow up and to be a thick mess of crap that you can't walk through, because if you can't walk through it, they can't walk through it. And I know that sounds weird for a little 3-ounce bird, but if you can't go through there, he can't go through. he's going to get in there and it's going to get thick, and there's a good home for snakes and predators and stuff like that. He's just not safe. He needs to be able to flight. He needs a flight out of there. Burn rotations is one of your big things. So make sure you burn. Don't let your property grow up. Manage your property like it should be used. And it's also more enjoyable for you as a landowner. It's not so much, I own this piece of property, but I don't ever do anything with it. If the property is where you can enjoy it and you can take your kids or grandkids and you can ride around on the property and watch the wildflowers bloom all the way through the year and let your granddaughters or daughters pick flowers or wives pick flowers, they enjoy that property just as much as you do, but you get the benefit of the wildlife on the property also. And you get the benefit of, hey, let's go down to the property. And they don't feel so bad about not wanting to go down, about you going down there, because they get to go with you and they get to hang out and do things like that. So.
Gotcha. Perfect. So again, Brandon, I got you here for an hour, and I want to let you get on with your day, man. And but how do people get a hold of you? Where do you usually work, and what do you specialize in?
I specialize in selling land. I mean, that's what I really want to do. But I'm a quail hunter, and you can get me through NLR. You can get me on my cell phone. NLR has that. If you just reach out there, send me an email, give me a phone call. I'll come look at the property. I'll tell you what it needs. I'll even help people, let's get started, and this is what I think you should do. But, my advice is what it is. It's my advice. This is what I've seen. I don't have that degree to back it. I've got real world experience, and I've seen what birds can do, and I know what can happen.
There is a similar vein that runs through every conversation that I have with any kind of land agent that I talk to. And there's a certain kind of person that goes in to specialize in land, and it's people that love land. And so everybody I talk to that works with land, real estate, it's just like, they just want to talk land. It's like you just said, just give me a call. I'll tell you exactly what you got and what I think that you need. And there's this consultation there, but it's also just like an enjoyment, right?
Right. I enjoy it. I love to see people's property turn into something different. I hunt with some guys south of here, and I give them advice. Hey, man, you need to do this. This is what would really set this place off. It'd make this place different. And that place has been in a quail plantation for 40 years. Maybe even longer. But like, if you did this, it really, really changed the way this looked. But it had gone away from looking at it as hunting birds and raising birds. It had gone into just a wreck property and hunting deer and stuff like that. So I see it from a different set of eyes. I see it as a different view and what I would like to see it. And sometimes it works. Sometimes people think I'm nuts, but I still enjoy it.
But that's the fun of it, right? Like, that's the absolute fun of it. Well, hey, Brandon, I appreciate your time, man. It's good. It's always good talking to you. So,
you too.
Yeah, pleasure chatting. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
This concludes episode number 23 for the National Land Realty podcast, discussing land improvements for quail hunting with Brandon Fowler from Montgomery, Alabama. You can learn more about land ownership and the buying and selling of land from nationalland.com. Quick reminder, please like, review, and share our show. Our show doesn't get found if people don't talk about it and hit that like button. So, if you found this show valuable, others will too. Make sure to share it. As we get reviews, we'll share them on the podcast. Now, thank you again, and we'll see you next time.